In a quiet estate, a kind-hearted black housemaid with a dream of becoming a doctor studied in secret after long, exhausting shifts. One night, the wealthy owner of the mansion discovered her and began silently observing her actions. Moved by her quiet determination, he gave her the chance to pursue her dream. Years later, she returned as a doctor, having not only fulfilled her dream, but also healed the heart of the man who helped her believe again. Before we begin, here's a question for you. When was the last time someone believed in you before you believed in yourself? In the hush of an early autumn morning, the grand Hartley estate stirred quietly beneath a pale silver sky. The house stood tall and stately at the edge of a wooded hill, its white columns casting long shadows across the dewy grass. Inside, silence prevailed like a sacred thing, broken only by the soft ticking of antique clocks and the faint rustle of leaves brushing against tall windows. Beneath the grandeur, in a modest servant's quarters tucked near the back of the house, a young girl rose before the sun had even dared lift its head. Her name was Amara Jones. 17 years old, she moved with the quiet rhythm of someone who had learned to carry the weight of too much, too young. Her fingers, calloused yet careful, tied the apron at her waist with practiced ease. She was not born into this world of velvet drapes and crystal chandeliers. Her world had once been small. 2 rooms in a crumbling duplex on the east side of town, a father who died too soon from an illness they couldn't afford to treat, a mother whose cough had grown deeper with every passing month, and a little brother who still asked, sometimes, why she didn't go to school anymore. Amara had once been a top student. Teachers whispered about scholarships and bright futures. Her notebooks, still neatly stacked in a corner of her shared room at home, were filled with diagrams of cells and hand-drawn organs, with words like cardiology and immunotherapy underlined in hopeful red. She dreamed of being a doctor, not for money or prestige, but because once, helplessly, as her father's body weakened, and later, as her mother's strength waned too, she had promised herself that she would find a way to understand the things that stole people like that and fight them back with knowledge. But when bills came faster than hope, school had to wait. Amara found work through an agency and was placed here, in the home of William Hartley, a reclusive billionaire known more for his stern silence than any warmth. Her days were full, sweeping, mopping, polishing the silver, making beds in rooms no one slept in anymore. She rarely spoke unless spoken to. She kept her head down, her smile soft and her voice quieter than the ticking clocks. Yet at night, when the house grew still and the chandeliers dimmed, Amara would sneak into the kitchen with her old textbooks tucked beneath her arm. There, by the yellow glow of a single lamp above the sink, she would open the pages and let herself remember who she had once wanted to be. She studied enzymes and skeletal systems, while the smell of dish soap and lemon lingered in the air. Her hands would sometimes be cracked from scrubbing, her eyes heavy with fatigue, but she never let a night go by without learning something, anything, that might bring her closer to her dream. No one in the house knew this about her. To them, she was just the quiet girl who worked hard and never asked for more. But Amara carried within her a quiet fire, and though the world around her often mistook her gentleness for fragility, her strength was not loud, it was enduring. She rose every morning not out of habit but out of love, for her mother, for her brother, and for a future she had not yet abandoned, even if it had begun to feel impossibly far away. As she prepared the breakfast trays and laid out the linens with careful symmetry, the echoes of laughter from richer girls her age, girls who went to sleepovers, talked about prom, and carried laptops in leather bags, sometimes drifted through her mind like ghosts. But Amara never lingered in envy. She had learned early that comparison was a thief and bitterness a burden. Instead, she carried gratitude like a shield and hope like a quiet song. The world may have pushed her into the background, but she had not disappeared. She was still here, still trying, still learning, under the flicker of a kitchen lamp in a house that had never been hers. And sooner than she could have imagined, someone was about to see her. It was nearly midnight when William Hartley stirred from another restless sleep. At 65, age had settled into his bones with quiet authority. He stood tall, still broad-shouldered, though his gait had slowed in recent years, and the lines on his face, once etched by success, now bore the heavier weight of grief. His hair had turned the color of winter ash, neatly combed each morning more out of habit than pride. He lived alone in the vast estate his fortune had built, surrounded by things of value but very little that felt truly alive. A man of discipline, William kept to himself, even among staff. Since the passing of his only daughter, he had retreated inward, letting the house grow colder, quieter, though never less immaculate. That night something pulled him from sleep. Perhaps it was the dull ache in his joints, or the dry tightness in his throat. Perhaps it was the dream, half forgotten now, of laughter that once filled the halls. He rose slowly, wrapped his robe around him, and padded down the carpeted corridor toward the kitchen, guided by muscle memory more than need. As he neared the back of the house, a soft light reached into the hallway. Strange, no lights were ever left on this late. William paused, curious, and listened. There was a faint scratch of pen on paper, a quiet clink of porcelain. He stepped into the shadowed edge of the doorway, careful not to make a sound. There, seated at the kitchen table beneath the warm glow of a single lamp, was Amara, the girl he barely knew. She was 17, he recalled, small-framed, with careful hands and a presence so quiet she often seemed to disappear into the walls. Tonight, however, she was not cleaning. Her apron was still knotted loosely at her back, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. A tower of unwashed dishes waited in the sink beside her, but she paid them no attention. Her face was bent over a textbook, lips moving silently as she read. Her pen glided across a spiral notebook, fingers stained faintly with ink and soap. She looked tired, not the kind of tired that came from work, but the kind that settled behind the eyes and stayed. Her back curved over the table in concentration, her brow furrowed in quiet determination. William watched her for a moment longer, puzzled, then took a step forward. The wooden floor creaked. Amara startled violently. She gasped, snapped the textbook shut, and shot to her feet, nearly knocking over her chipped ceramic mug. I'm sorry, sir," she stammered, eyes wide. I didn't mean. I'll wash the dishes now. I was just about to." William raised a hand gently, his voice even. "No need. I'm not here about the dishes." He glanced at the table, then back at her. "What were you working on?" Amara stood frozen. Her heart thudded in her chest. "It's nothing important," she murmured. "Just reviewing a little. I should have finished the cleaning first, I know." His tone softened, but he didn't move. "Reviewing what?" Her fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. She swallowed, eyes lowered. "Biology. I like to study, when things are quiet." She hesitated, then added even more quietly, "I want to be a doctor. Maybe. Someday." That gave William pause. "A doctor?" he repeated, not unkindly. Amara nodded once, quickly. "My father. He got sick a few years ago. We couldn't afford to take him to a hospital. It happened very fast." Her voice grew smaller with each word. "Now my mother's sick too. And I have a little brother. I had to stop going to school last year, but I still try to learn. I just thought, maybe if I could keep up one day when things are better, I could go back." She was bracing herself for reprimand, for a sharp word, or worse, dismissal. Instead, there was silence. William studied her face, the way her eyes flickered between fear and longing, how she held her breath like someone used to being told no before she ever dared ask yes. "Do you do this every night?" he asked. She glanced at the books, then back at him. "Only when there's time," she whispered. A slow breath left William's chest. He didn't say anything else. He moved past her, filled a glass with water from the faucet, and stood there for a moment, looking out the window into the dark. Then, without turning around, he said, "Don't stay up too late," and walked out of the kitchen. Amara remained still, gripping the edge of the table. Her breath trembled as she sat back down, slowly reopening her book with hands that shook just slightly. She didn't know what to make of it. He hadn't been angry. He hadn't told her to stop. He hadn't even looked at the dirty dishes. And more than that, he'd listened. For the first time, someone had asked what she was doing, and waited for the answer. She didn't realize it then, but that night would be the first stone laid in a path she'd almost stopped believing was possible. The morning after that quiet encounter passed like any other, at least on the surface. Amara resumed her tasks with the same steady hands and modest grace, careful to stay invisible in the corners of the grand home. But something had shifted, even if she couldn't quite name it. There was a strange lightness in her chest, tentative, fragile. William Hartley hadn't scolded her. He hadn't dismissed her dream as childish. He had asked, then listened. That alone felt like an ember glowing faintly in the cold. But William, too, had not forgotten. He began noticing her in ways he hadn't before, not just as part of the house's rhythm, but as a person with her own quiet center of gravity. He didn't speak to her again right away. Instead, he watched, observed. From the shadows of hallways, from his study window, from across the garden path. It wasn't surveillance. It was something closer to curiosity. And perhaps something closer to remembrance. He saw how she rose before dawn, always the first in the kitchen, how she brewed the coffee before the others woke, wiping the counter with soft circular motions, as if tending to something sacred. He noticed how she helped the elderly gardener lift heavy potted plants without being asked, how she crouched to rewrap the tape around his aging knees when she thought no one was watching. He saw her kneel beside the head chef's young son one afternoon, carefully examining the boy's dislocated thumb after a fall. Her touch gentle, movements precise, the way she whispered reassurance until the boy stopped crying. There was no panic in her, only presence. She was everywhere and nowhere at once, folding sheets with corners tight enough to impress military staff, collecting stray shoes from mudrooms, humming softly under her breath when no one was around. But it was her eyes that stayed with William, the way they lit up not for praise but when someone else was in need. She didn't move for recognition, she moved from instinct. And that instinct was care. Days passed like soft-spoken prayers. William said little, but within him something began to stir. At first it was a mild ache, the kind that arrives when one realizes they've overlooked something good for far too long. But it grew. He began to think of his daughter, Clara, with her quick wit and endless notebooks filled with half-finished ideas. She had once spoken the same way Amara did, eyes glowing with questions. She, too, had wanted to study medicine, had spoken of making things right in the world. And she, too, had disappeared too soon, taken in an accident no father should have to remember each morning he opens his eyes. It was nearing the middle of October when he found himself staring through the library window, watching as Amara crouched in the garden path, lifting fallen branches from the brick walkway after a night's storm. The wind tousled her curls, her shoulders trembled with the cold, but her focus never wavered. A thin scarf wrapped loosely around her neck. No gloves. No complaint. He asked the housekeeper later that day if Amara had gloves for the mornings. The woman blinked and shook her head. "She never asked for any, sir." That night, a pair of leather gloves appeared on the small hook outside the servants' entrance, wrapped in brown paper, no note. Amara said nothing, but when she put them on the next morning, her eyes shimmered for a moment before she tucked them into her sleeves and went about her work as always. William saw her from the top of the stairs and looked away quickly, though something tightened behind his ribs. He didn't know what to call the feeling, only that it was unfamiliar and growing. It was October 14th, an overcast morning draped in a thin mist, the kind of day when the sky itself seemed to carry the weight of memory. William Hartley drove alone, as he always did on this day, hands steady on the wheel, jaw set in a line that had become permanent over the years. No driver, no company, only silence and the familiar ache that deepened as the car wound through the narrow road leading to the family mausoleum. This ritual had been his every year since the accident. White lilies, 10 minutes of silence, and then back to the hollow echo of the estate, where time no longer moved forward, only sideways. But this year something changed. As he neared the small gated entrance to the burial grounds, William noticed the gate was already slightly ajar. He frowned, slowed the car and stepped out, the wind cutting gently across his cheeks. The gravel crunched beneath his polished shoes as he approached, and then he saw her. Amara. She was standing in front of Clara's headstone, broom in hand, gently brushing away fallen leaves and petals browned by early frost. Her figure was still, her posture respectful, her dark hair pulled back with care. She wore a navy blue coat slightly too thin for the chill, and beside her, resting at the base of the stone, was a small bouquet of soft yellow lilies, matching the ones he held now in his own hand. For a moment William couldn't breathe. She turned when she heard his steps. Her eyes widened slightly with guilt, like someone caught trespassing not on property but on something far more personal. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, voice barely above the wind. "I didn't mean to intrude. I saw the picture on your desk last week, the one with the date October 14. The way you looked at it," she trailed off, eyes lowering. "I thought maybe it was her birthday. I just didn't want her to be alone today." William stood there, silent, his breath held in his throat. He looked down at the headstone. Clara Elise Hartley, beloved daughter, cherished soul. And then at the lilies she had placed. She had chosen the right kind. Somehow she had known. "No one's come here in years," he finally murmured. Amara lowered the broom slowly. "Sometimes people forget graves. I thought maybe she'd like to know someone still remembers her." Something in William broke open. The words came uninvited, carried on a voice rough with something deeper than time. "She was 22, he said, staring at the stone. Bright. Brilliant, really. Studied medicine at Stanford, wanted to open free clinics across the South, said no one should ever have to choose between food and medicine." Amara's breath caught. Her eyes searched his face gently. "She wanted to be a doctor?" He nodded. "Since she was 7. Used to tape up her dolls and draw organs on the walls with crayons. Drove her mother crazy." A breath, half laugh, half sigh, escaped him, but it didn't reach his eyes. "She'd died in a car crash, coming home from volunteering at a shelter. She'd stayed late helping an elderly man fill out prescription forms. It was raining. The other driver didn't see the red light." He fell silent, the air between them thick with something sacred and unspoken. "She was everything," he continued quietly after a long pause. "After she died, her mother faded too. Not from illness, not really, just from the kind of sorrow that doesn't leave room for anything else. I buried them both in the same year, and after that," his voice thinned, "I kept living, but I don't remember how." Amara stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her. Her voice, when it came, was as soft as wind through winter trees. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Hartley." He looked at her then, not just saw her, but looked, into the kind of quiet that holds both pain and strength. "I thought the world stopped making people like her," he said. "But then I saw you, in the kitchen that night, and every morning since." Amara's lips parted, but she didn't speak. The wind rustled the leaves gently around their feet. "I've watched you," he admitted. "Not to judge, I wasn't even sure why. But every day you reminded me of something I thought I'd lost. Not just Clara, but the belief that kindness still matters, that it isn't weakness, that it survives, even when the world gives no reward for it." She blinked, her eyes beginning to sting. "I don't know what brought you into my house," he said, "but I think—" His voice faltered, then steadied. "Maybe it was time something good found its way back in." They stood together in silence, facing the gravestone, no longer strangers. The air didn't feel so cold anymore. When they turned to walk back toward the car, William didn't walk ahead. He walked beside her, and Amara, for the first time in a long while, let herself feel the warmth of something new. Not charity, not pity, but recognition. And maybe, even in the quietest corners of sorrow, beginning. The day after Clara's birthday passed with the quiet grace of a memory well tended. No words were spoken about the cemetery visit, no announcements made, yet something imperceptible had changed within the walls of the Hartley estate. The air felt different, less like glass and more like breath. Amara rose at dawn, as always, tying her apron with practiced fingers, brushing her hair into a low knot before stepping into the hush of the empty kitchen. But now she moved with a strange awareness, as though a door she didn't know existed had quietly opened, not wide, but just enough to let in light. She didn't expect anything to come of it. William Hartley had been kind to her, yes, had shared something achingly personal beside a headstone that morning, but in her world, moments like that were allowed only to live as memories. She didn't expect follow-through. She didn't expect more. And so, on a rainy Thursday morning, while the house ticked along in its usual rhythm, William summoned Amara to his study. She stood in the doorway, hands folded, unsure whether she was in trouble or being offered some new task. He gestured to the armchair opposite his desk. "Sit," he said, not sharply but gently. She hesitated, then obeyed. On the desk before him lay a single cream-colored envelope, no branding, no wax seal, just her name, written in neat, elegant script. He slid it across the table. "Open it." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached forward. She unfolded the letter inside, her eyes skimming the first lines, then widening, her breath caught. This is an acceptance letter." "To the Boston School of Medicine," William said calmly. "Full scholarship, room and board, books, everything covered." Her voice trembled. "But I didn't even apply." "You didn't need to. I spoke with them, sent samples of your notes, your volunteer hours at the clinic before you stopped school, your test scores from last year. They were impressed. I simply helped the door open." Amara stared at the letter, then looked up at him, completely at a loss. "Mr. Hartley, I can't accept this." "You can," he replied, folding his hands, "and you will." She stood up slowly, heart pounding. "I want to. I do. But I can't leave my mom. And Julian. They depend on me. There's no one else." William leaned forward, his voice softer now, steady with something deeper than generosity. "Then let them depend on me. I'll cover the bills. Rent, groceries, medication, until you're working, until you have a title after your name. You will never owe me anything. You've already given more to this house than I could have asked." Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. "Why?" she whispered. "Because once," he said, "someone was going to save the world. She didn't get the chance, but maybe now someone else can." Amara pressed the letter to her chest, her breath catching on a sob she tried to swallow. She didn't cry easily, not in front of people, but now she couldn't hold it back. She crossed the room and embraced him, arms tight around shoulders that had once carried more grief than most could survive. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to—" "You don't have to know," he said, holding her gently. "Just promise me this. Become what you were born to be, and when someone comes to you one day, just like you came to me, don't turn away." And in that quiet room, two people who had lost the world found, in each other, a reason to believe again. Their final morning together was a quiet one. The sky was still soft with dawn when Amara walked into the kitchen one last time. Her bags were packed, stacked near the door like small promises. She moved gently through the space, brushing her fingers over the edges of the counter where she used to study at midnight, placing a hand briefly on the table where that first unexpected conversation had taken place. William met her near the front hall, a wool coat folded over one arm. "It's colder in Boston than here," he said simply, placing it into her hands. "Wear it when the wind bites." She smiled, eyes glassy. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley, for everything. I don't have the right words." "You already gave them to me," he replied, voice steady. "You gave me back something I thought I'd buried." He walked her to the car, stood beside her as the engine started, and just before she climbed in, he pressed something into her hand, a small, worn photo. It was a picture of Clara, grinning, her white coat unbuttoned, a stethoscope around her neck and wind in her hair. "She would have liked you," he said. "She would have believed in you too." Amara nodded, unable to speak. The car pulled away slowly, and as the estate disappeared in the rearview mirror, she didn't feel the usual fear of leaving something behind. She felt the pull of something ahead. The years that followed were not easy. Boston was colder, faster, lonelier. The coursework was grueling, the nights long, the weight of responsibility never far. There were times Amara sat alone in the quiet of her dorm room, the city lights blinking outside her window, and wondered if she was truly meant to be here. But then she would look at the small frame beside her bed, the photograph of Clara, and remember who had believed in her when she was still invisible. And she would keep going. She called home every Sunday. Elijah's voice was changing now, cracking on the edges as he proudly read her letters from school. Her mother's breathing sounded stronger each month. William never asked for updates, but she sent them anyway. Short, handwritten notes with no flourish, just facts and small triumphs. Passed anatomy with distinction. Shadowing a cardiologist this summer. Got my first white coat. His replies were simple, proud, keep going. You're almost there. Then, one bright June morning, 5 years to the day since she first stayed up past midnight in the kitchen, Amara crossed the stage in a white dress beneath her graduation gown and received her diploma. Dr. Amara Jones with honors. She didn't cry when they called her name. She saved the tears for later, alone in the dressing room, fingers tracing the gold lettering of the degree, thinking of a man who wasn't her father by blood, but had fathered her dream all the same. 2 weeks later she returned, not just to visit, but to keep a promise. The Hartley estate looked the same, but as she stepped through the front gates, it no longer felt like a place she served. It felt like a place that had held part of her becoming. She found William in the study, seated in his usual chair by the window. He had aged just a little. The lines around his mouth were deeper, his hair a little thinner. But when he saw her, his face softened with something that had no name but was unmistakable. She stood before him, not in an apron, not with downcast eyes, but in a soft gray dress and her white coat folded over one arm. "Hello, Mr. Hartley," she said. "I came back to tell you. We made it." He looked at her, took her in slowly, and then smiled. Not the polite kind, the real kind. "No," he said, "you made it." She stepped forward, placed the photograph of Clara on the desk, then sat beside him. "You once said someone was going to save the world. She didn't get the chance. But maybe now I can carry a part of that forward." He nodded, voice low. "You already are." Later that afternoon, a journalist came by for a scheduled interview, an article highlighting the top new medical graduates in the state. Amara greeted her warmly, answered each question with grace, but when asked, "What inspired you to become a doctor?" she paused. "My father died when I was young," she said slowly. "My mother fell sick. I had to leave school. I thought the dream was over. But someone saw me when I was invisible. He wasn't my father, but he stood in that place, quietly, patiently. He believed in something I hadn't dared believe in myself." The interviewer leaned forward. "So, who do you credit most for helping you become the doctor you are?" Amara smiled, glancing toward the hallway where William now stood, watching from just beyond the doorway. "I'd say, my father lit the fire, but Mr. Hartley gave it a home to burn." And in that moment, beneath the golden light spilling through the tall windows of a house once too grand for dreams, a quiet promise came full circle. Not with fanfare, not with applause, but with something far rarer, the steady, unshakable truth that kindness, when given freely, becomes legacy. One weekend in November, Amara returned to the estate again, not just as a guest, but as family. She entered through the front door for the first time, not the servant's side entrance, and William was waiting in the hall, dressed in a soft gray cardigan, his eyes brighter than she remembered. They walked slowly together into the sitting room, where a fire crackled, and she offered him a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. Amara in her white coat, arms crossed, standing before the hospital's outreach clinic. In the background, a new plaque had just been installed above the door. William held the photo for a long moment, his thumb brushing gently over the lettering on the plaque. "The Clara Hartley Community Health Center." His voice trembled just slightly. "You named it after her." "She was the reason," Amara said softly. "She still is." He looked at her, his eyes damp, and nodded. There were no words for what passed between them. Just time, healed and returned in another form. They sat for hours, watching the fire. At one point, William turned toward her and asked, "Do you still carry the dream?" She smiled. "Every day. But now it's bigger. I want to build something permanent. a clinic of my own, in the neighborhood I came from, one where no one is turned away." He nodded again, slower this time, and leaned back in his chair. "Then let's build it. Together." Under the growing twilight, two lives once separated by distance and silence sat side by side, woven now by something neither time nor tragedy could undo. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.